Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate all the amazing people who have worked so hard in the trenches to make Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. You know, when I think about SuperTalk Mississippi and the incredible footprint that it has across the state of Mississippi, this great vision of Steve Davenport, you can't help but think about Paul Gallo and the incredible contribution that he has made to this state. And we're all sad in our SuperTalk Mississippi family to unfortunately have to share the news that Paul has passed away after a really significant and sustained battle with medical issues. But boy, does Paul leave a legacy. I want to read to you what SuperTalk Mississippi posted announcing that Paul had passed. And here's what we wrote. Mississippi lost one of its most iconic voices and passionate champions with the passing of Paul Gallo on January the 19th. For over 5 decades, Paul didn't just talk about Mississippi. He helped shape its story. From the first day behind a microphone on February the 12th, 1968, to his final broadcast, Paul dedicated his life to his listeners, his state, and the pursuit of truth. Paul's journey into radio began on his 21st birthday when he stepped into the studio for the first time, receiving a gift of a career that would define his life and leave a mark on Mississippi. From DJ to program director, from sales and management to ownership, Paul mastered every aspect of the business. His name became synonymous with the excellence of Mississippi media, most notably as the host of the Gallo radio show, the heartbeat of the SuperTalk Mississippi network. When Paul joined the SuperTalk family in January of 1990, he helped bring Steve Davenport's vision of a statewide talk network to life. What began as a single station grew into a powerhouse network and amplifying Mississippi's stories and voices to millions across the state via radio, SuperTalk TV, and the digital platforms. Mississippi lost a giant today, said Steve Davenport, owner of SuperTalk Mississippi Media. For over 30 years, he was my friend, a true brother in broadcast and in life. To Paul, radio wasn't just a career, it was a calling. His favorite part of the job, as I often said, was our audience family. His listeners weren't just numbers, they were the pulse of everything he did. He made everyone feel like they were sitting across the table from an old friend, drawn in by his voice and captivated by his unwavering passion for Mississippi. I will miss him dearly, just as I know people from all corners of the state will miss him. So that's what we posted, and the tributes have really just poured in. Governor Reeves posted that he and his wife Ely were saddened to hear of Paul's passing. Jason White, the Speaker of the House, posted, with the passing of Paul Gallo, Mississippi has lost a legend. As a frequent guest of the Gallo radio show, I will greatly miss the conversations with my friend and respective host. Paul was a champion of discussing meaningful policy, never shying away from asking the hard question. And, of course, the speaker went on from there. Delbert Hoseman, my friend Paul Gallo, has passed away. His positive contribution to the political discourse over decades cannot be overstated. Sharp, insightful, and always prepared. And, of course, he goes on from there. And, I think this one from Bill Cork, who heads the Mississippi Development Authority, is important because I think it shares the story of a lot of people who come to this state and are introduced to this state, or were introduced to this state by Paul. When I came to Mississippi nearly 9 years ago, I was advised to listen to Paul every morning. He taught me so much about the state and movers and shakers that made the state come alive. It was an honor to eventually make it onto his show several times, and he goes on from there. And then I found this one kind of touching. This is from Lynn Williams Kelly from Oxford. She said it's kind of funny story. She says she has an old Persian cat that I would take to the vet, and the drive would be about an hour. Needless to say, didn't like riding and would cry and howl. When I turned Paul on the radio, his voice would calm her, and she would stop howling. We love Paul, and he will be greatly missed. Lynn from Oxford. But, that was something about Paul's voice. And I think, Paul's love of animals, I think he would have loved to have read that note from Lynn. and he would have gotten a big chuckle out of that. Listen, we're going to spend the whole show today looking back and at Paul's legacy. Then I'm thrilled to be joined by Richard Cross, who's literally been sitting in that chair for Paul now for a few months. And you know him well from Sports Talk Mississippi, and he's been on my show several times. I look forward to looking back with Richard. But anyway, without any further ado, Richard Cross. How you doing, my friend?
Ricky, always good to be with you. Sorry the circumstances are what they are, but so many tributes, as you mentioned, have come in over the last few days for a man that it's not so much that he redefined an industry or a genre, but he kind of shaped talk radio in Mississippi. Words like giant in that quote that you read from Steve Davenport, pioneer, and lots of others. But I think it's the connection with his audience that he built. You know, there's so many things that go into having a successful radio program. I think longevity is one of those. And that may just sound overly simple, but when someone is with you for a long time, and I guess maybe Sports Talk as an example, is we've been on the air for over a decade now in the afternoons, it feels like people grow up with you. And I know it's sometimes trite to say somebody that maybe you've never even met feels like a member of your family, but radio has this special ability to build a relationship with the person who is behind the mic. And I think that's something that all of us have to always be aware of. I don't know that it's different from sports. You know, whoever your favorite sports team is, whether you're a Saints fan or an Ole Miss fan or a Mississippi State fan or a New York Yankees fan, you feel a kinship, I think, to the person that brings you the game, who paints that picture for you, and you feel like they are yours and they are part of your family. And when you have somebody in a position for 3.5 decades, I think 1990 is when Paul began, and obviously passes away now in 2025. That's a really long time. And there are people that have literally grown up and grown older with Paul Gallo. And I think that's part of the reason that relationship was so special with his audience. There was the familiarity there. And I think it's the reason that so many people have been so saddened by this.
Just I've had so many opportunities over the past 5 years to join him, whether it be an issue that I had on outdoors that we were focused on, or maybe it was an issue in coastal Mississippi we were focused on, or maybe he and I were getting together and talking about the state of media and having conversations about that. But he wanted to have a diverse number of conversations. He wanted to really try to understand the Mississippi condition. But there's one thing that really stuck out to me in my conversations with Paul, both on the air and off the air, and it was integrity. He has such a clear understanding of his connection to his audience, and he didn't want to do anything to damage that, even if it meant tough love. But he was going to say it the way he saw it, and he knew they expected that of him. And as a result of that, people came back over and over and over again and trusted him to speak to them about national issues that were important, the Mississippi culture, and why why it's important for us to stay in touch with who we are as Mississippians. And when it was local issues, he didn't mind connecting to those in a big way. But he didn't hold back, Richard. He's called it the way he saw it, and integrity was the thing that kind of kept it going. And that's a powerful thing to have over all those years, isn't it?
Well, and I think another way of saying integrity is just honesty. He was honest with his audience, and I think he was protective of the people who listened in the same way that I said just a second ago, that people felt like he was theirs, like he is my host in the morning, he is my company on the way to work, or as I'm taking kids to school. He valued that and was protective of that audience, and I think that was very important to him. It was important for him to be honest. I think he tried to do that in his personal life, and I think he absolutely did that in his radio life.
People have referred to him as kind of the Rush Limbaugh of Mississippi. He probably could have had a national footprint at some point, because first of all, right off the bat, man, his voice was unbelievable. I mean, you're talking about brand awareness. You hear Paul speak, it just stuck out, didn't it?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I late last night, as I was kind of finishing up some prep for the Gallo show, I actually went back and listened. And I know at middle part of September, he was having some voice issues, and so I went back a little bit farther. I went back into July, into June, and wanted to hear that full throated baritone when it was exactly the way he wanted it to be. And you're right, it was a golden voice. That was a voice that was made to talk into a microphone, and he certainly did that to the best of his ability for a really long time.
When we continue our tribute, our discussion of the legacy of Paul Gallo with Richard Cross, we're gonna hear from Paul, a show that I did with Paul, and we'll pull some segments out and let you hear it from Paul, some of the early days. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. My friend Richard Cross from SuperTalk, Mississippi, who's been sitting in for Paul Gallo for over 4 months, I believe, joined me, and we're doing a tribute to Paul Gallo. But listen, it would take show after show after show to read all the tributes. But one came from Drake Bassett, who's president and CEO of the Palmer Home, and Paul for so many years helped raise millions of dollars for Paul. But Drake said Paul's belief in our mission was unwavering. Whether on our campus or on air, he amplified our work and inspired others to get involved. But when he latched onto an issue, man, you had to join with him in a way, didn't you, Richard?
You did, and our relationship as a company with Palmer Home is special. It has now extended well over a decade, and I've been fortunate, like Paul, to have been a part of every single Palmer Home Radiothon that we've done. And there is a relationship that has been built between Palmer Home and the incredible work that they're doing to create a safe place for children where all of their needs are taken care of, their spiritual needs, their educational needs, their physical needs. And being on that campus year after year, we literally have watched some of those young people grow up from 3, 4, 5 years old to now in high school. Some of them going on to college or getting into the workforce. And I think it grabbed Paul. One of the things I always remember, he loved it, and we didn't have this as much in the afternoon. This was more kind of a morning time thing. He loved when the youth choir came, and he would have them sing on the air and visit with those. And it was like he just melted. It was a special thing. And I think our relationship with Palmer Home over time has caused all of us to look inward a little bit and think about the relationships that exist with our own children. In Paul's case, the relationships that he had with his grandchildren and now his great-grandchildren. I think we are reminded of how blessed we are and how fortunate we are to be able to give our children the things that I think human nature with parents is you want to give your kids more than you had, regardless of how much you had, whether it was a lot or a little or somewhere in between. And it felt like there was an opportunity to give there. And I think there was some self-reflection along the way. And it was undoubtedly something that was very, very special to Paul.
And our listeners gave.
Oh,
they gave in big ways.
So generous.
And it helped us all, man. I mean, all the shows that I've done about Palmer Home with Drake and others, and talking about their work with foster children, and you get into the kind of conditions that some of these children come from, and it does make you reflect. It does make you become inwardly focused on your own situation and help you understand that, number one, we should all be thankful in the moment that we all have with our loved ones. But at the same time, there's a contribution we can make to others who may not have the opportunity to reflect in that way. And special stuff, man. And Paul was so passionate about that. That's for sure. Hey, let's do something. I had Paul on the show in the last year or so, and we talked about his story. And at some point, we'll try to play that entire show because it really is a recollection of his entire path in radio. But I pulled 3 segments, and I don't know which segment this first one's going to be, but I'll just get Kyle to play it. I think they're all a minute and a half to 2 minutes long. and then we'll talk on the other side. Go ahead, Kyle. Play that first.
Yeah,
one.
you know what's interesting? I was going to ask you, did you always have that inquisitive nature about yourself? But it sounds like at a very young age you did.
I learned so much in school that I thought I didn't because I was always class clown. For me, and I think a lot of people can understand this, the ability to make someone smile and laugh was always something that I got more rewards out of, and I better because there was some punishment that came along with it, whether it's in the church or in school. So it was costly as far as when somebody came in and saw me performing in front of the class or right before Mass started or something like that. So,
ooh, how I can relate to that.
And let me say this. I'll tell you a story. We didn't have a Catholic school in Shaw. We had what was it, 2 weeks of summer school when the nuns would come in. It's the first time we actually saw nuns with the habits on. So it's like meeting God in a dress at that particular time. And these people were scary. Sister Regina caught me performing to a group when the class was there and she was going to be in, but she had to go. So I'm standing up doing stand-up. And she caught me and she brought me in, and this is a true story. She brought me up in front of the class, and there was no air conditioning. Big fan that was there to cool us off. And she said, you know, when I did what you did, I want to show you something. She showed me her finger, and her finger was cut off. And she showed me the finger, and it was this nub on the forefinger. And she said, I was doing what you were doing when I was your age. And here's what the nun did to me. She showed me the finger. So after that, I behaved for quite a while, for the rest of the 2 weeks. So.
All these nuggets, Richard, but isn't it beautiful to hear him tell that story?
Sister Regina. And, you know, part of that tribute that we had, as it was Monday morning, talked about Paul's ability to connect through storytelling, that was his greatest gift. And even in that small clip, I think you get a little bit of a glimpse of that, where he mentions, you know, we had this big fan. We didn't have air conditioning, so that's what kept us cool. Just small little nuggets that enhance the story and kind of take you there. And I don't want to be pigeonholed as a sports guy because I go to another sports example. I know I've done that a couple of times, but if you're listening to a ball game, that's what you want, right? If you can't be in the stadium, if you can't be sitting in the stands, seeing it with your own eyes and hearing it with your own ears, you want that play-by-play announcer to take you there. And Paul had the ability to do that, whether he's talking about nuns in Shaw, Mississippi, or he was talking about something that was going on at the Capitol. His ability to connect through storytelling is as good as I've ever heard.
Yeah, it was so interesting hearing him talk about his early days. And, you know, essentially what he was communicating is he was a handful. He was a handful. But I get it. I'm sure you were a handful at some point in your life. But Paul, you know, it was interesting that he told that story on the question of being inquisitive. But I think Paul was always exploring, and always, maybe he was the class clown and enjoyed being that. He was always kind of he was not going to do it the way everybody else was going to do it. That was his nature.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to be a good radio host, a compelling radio host, then you have to be interested in the people that you're visiting with. Not every topic is going to, blow your skirt up, but even if it's something that isn't a passion for you, if you're genuinely interested in people and their stories and what they're doing and how what they're doing may connect with the audience writ large, then you got a chance to be successful. And I do think there was a genuine curiosity, but also a genuine interest in people.
Yeah. Hey, Kyle, checking in with Kyle real quick on time. We got enough time to play another segment. Okay, so let's hear one more of Paul before we go to break. Here we go.
I didn't realize how unique it is what Steve put together, and I joined him in I think in December 1989, and actually began in the office in January. And it was later on. Of course, SuperTalk wasn't even then there. Came in as an account executive and was handling the advertising. Several he had me doing just about everything. Pay-per-view, the first pay-per-view. We were doing affiliate relations, traveling across the state, signing up affiliates. Not existed as SuperTalk, but we had, of course, Mississippi News Network. I think at that particular time we had the Ole Miss Network, Southern Network as far as Southern, and also Mississippi State. So it's State, Ole Miss, and Southern, all three, and the Agricultural Network, which evolved from the old MANN, Mississippi Agricultural News Network. So there were a lot of things going on. And every once in a while, Steve would mention this thing about the possibility of forming a talk radio network. And, Ricky, I never knew how unique that was until years later. We did 2 broadcasts. I think it was 2 years in a row, and maybe it was a skip in there. We were invited to Washington, and they broadcast were all the radio stations on Radio Row. Which was an incredible opportunity. You could see the Capitol out the hotel that we were in on Radio Row. And the guy at FAIR, the immigration folks, he was on the air with me, and he said, "Do you know how unique your network is?" I says, "No, there's a lot of networks." He said, "There's nobody else in the United States of America doing what you guys are doing under a private ownership."
Yeah, I thought that's a very telling time. We actually spent a lot of time on that show, Paul and I, talking about the vision of SuperTalk Mississippi and how it's evolved, Steve's incredible vision, and what it took to ultimately be successful. We're doing a tribute to our friend Paul Gallo, who recently passed away. I have Richard Cross with me, who's sitting in and has been for about 4 months on the Gallo show. When we come back on the other side, we'll talk about how Paul's story is SuperTalk's story and why that's so important, the legacy of SuperTalk. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. We're visiting with my friend Richard Cross, and we're honoring our friend Paul Gallo, who passed away this past weekend. What a legend, what a giant in our industry and in Mississippi. And we're talking about Paul. When we went to break, Paul, I had played a segment from a show that I did with Paul Gallo, and he talked about how what Steve created with Paul's help, what he created in SuperTalk Mississippi, the statewide network. He created several networks, but this being one very important one. And in some ways, as I mentioned before we went to break, Paul's story is SuperTalk's story. What Paul did to help build SuperTalk into this unbelievable brand is not only unique in America, that is for sure, but it is one that I think is very sustainable in even a digital world that we live in today, that radio is alive and well and still doing incredibly well. But it's interesting hearing him reflect on the early days, isn't it?
You know, it is. And radio is kind of like a cockroach. You just can't get rid of it. Or maybe said a little more eloquently, in the words of Mark Twain, rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated when it comes to radio. All of the things that were going to make radio go away, right? Satellite radio was going to make terrestrial radio go away. And yet we've still got a radio button. It's not a dial anymore, but a button in our vehicles. The advent of podcast was going to make radio go away, and it's still kicking along. Now, those who are in positions of leadership that are smart have adopted podcasts and other strains of multimedia to go along with radio. I don't think it's just a standalone entity anymore, but the actual radio, that relationship that you have, whether you're listening through your car speakers or you're sitting on your back porch, or maybe you're streaming it through speakers or a television in your house, it just keeps on plugging. And I don't think that's going to change. I certainly don't have a crystal ball to be able to look way into the future. But so one of the things that was interesting to me growing up was syndicated radio. Not so much Rush Limbaugh, which was national, but there were some regional sports talk shows that I listened to when I was in junior high, high school, into college. And I was like, man, what a fascinating concept. They were mostly centered around SEC football. And so they were in kind of the Southeastern Conference footprint. I was like, that's a really neat concept. I've got friends, though, that are in radio in bigger markets, whether it's Atlanta or Memphis or Birmingham or even, New Orleans. And those markets stand alone. But Mississippi doesn't have a major market. And I think ultimately that was kind of the vision. You've mentioned Steve Davenport a couple of times. That was Steve's vision. How do we turn Mississippi into a single major market? Well, you take radio stations that cover the state, and it took a long time to get there. But I mean, we as a company are now heard in all 82 counties in the state of Mississippi. The addition of the coast was huge. It was a decade or so ago when it came online there, and strong stations in the Delta and in the Pine Belt and in the eastern part of the state and up in Corinth and in Oxford and North Mississippi, to tie the entire state together. And Mississippi's such a unique state as well, right? I mean, Oxford is not the same as Ocean Springs. Greenwood is not the same as Meridian. And yet we all have commonality. And to be able to find that and keep it together, I think is really cool.
Well, listen, I've said it many times. That's okay. Yeah, as a former publisher of newspapers, I always wondered, as the digital tsunami was overcoming newspapers, and we weren't hurting for readers. The problem was the advertising model for newspapers just disintegrated with what was happening with the digital side of things. And for companies, unless they really embraced that, they were really going to struggle mightily. I was curious when I came to start this show, what is the status of radio? And so I've learned a lot. First of all, that radio can find its way, just like you mentioned all those threats on radio along the way. Of course, the initial threat was when the TV was invented.
Yeah.
They thought, radio was dead. Well, that didn't happen. Because people, here's what we know. People want to consume information in different ways. And what's important about what radio brings to the table is now, as you pointed out, we can go multimedia. So we've got SuperTalk TV, we've got the podcast platforms. You've got obviously the social media piece to that. But as I often say, even when I say all that, radio is still king. People are still tuning in on their cars or at their offices. I'm struck, as I'm sure you are. When I often give this example, I got a note from a guy who works in a factory, who listens to Outdoors every Monday with his friends as they sit around the lunch table, eating their sandwiches, and it's just factory workers that are just engaging, and then you've got the highest leaders of our state that are paying attention, and every point in between. The fact that you can still have that kind of an impact, even with all the competing technologies, that bodes well. And I think what Steve said is, we're not going to do what we're not going to sell out to national brands and then have a national footprint with everything centralized and whatever. He's going to do literally the opposite. And that's what he did with Paul's help. And they built this incredible brand. And it is alive and well today because we're really addressing the needs of this state. And I think as long as you can be incredibly focused on what's impacting the lives of Mississippians in the way that we are focused, you're going to be relevant and you have a great future.
Yeah, and I think there are two things that stand out there. One, it's local, right? It's statewide, but it's local to Mississippi. You can go anywhere and hear about what's happening in Congress and in D.C. and what's talking about there, but not everybody's talking about what's happening in the Mississippi legislature. You've always heard the statement, all politics are local, because it's about what affects you, what affects your life, what's important to you. And so the idea that even though it is a statewide footprint, it's local in the sense that it's Mississippi. That's one. And the other thing that you said that really stood out to me, I mean, in every industry, you got to be able to make revenue, to keep the lights on, to keep your product moving forward, to be able to pay salaries. And so the advertising piece that you talked about in the newspaper industry changing, it has changed in the radio industry, but it goes back to something that we were talking about earlier, Ricky. I think it's connection. It's the ability to connect. And I'll use C Spire as an example because they're such a great partner of our company and such an incredible Mississippi company. When Paul talked about C Spire, it didn't feel like he was trying to sell you a phone. It didn't feel like he was trying to get you to call them up and get their fiber to the home internet into your house. Obviously, that was the end goal. That's the reason the relationship was there. It's the reason that C Spire spends advertising dollars. It's the reason we try to sell to C Spire so that they will spend advertising dollars. But Paul took that a step farther. He made it personal. He talked about, what his grandkids were able to do with the internet in his house that he was getting through C Spire or whatever connection point that was. It was about building trust, building a relationship with the audience, and then connecting even through advertising. You can't do that with a print ad. You can't even do that with a geo-targeted ad on Instagram or Facebook. It's not the personal connection that you still have in radio.
Yeah, you're totally right. If you think back, again, coming back to that clip that we played about Paul talking about the early days, didn't even have this network at the time, and then Steve continued to buy new radio stations, and it evolved into what we now know as SuperTalk Mississippi Media. But had they not been together in that moment, and where Steve could really begin to envision where someone like Paul could go in a network as he continued to develop his network, we may not even have Sports Talk Mississippi today. Just think about the evolution of all these different pieces.
Brother, I'm here to tell you, it took a long time and a lot of convincing before, Sports Talk Mississippi didn't just pop on the air one day and nobody had ever thought of it. It took a long time to get to that point where Steve and God bless her. Thank you. The president of our company, Kim Dillon, who finally convinced him, hey, this may be the way to go. And he had his reasons, right? I mean, Paul talked earlier in that clip that you played about being the media rights holder for Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Southern Miss. And I think a lot of his thought along the way was, how are we going to talk and bash coaches on the radio and then turn around and broadcast their games on Saturdays or on Wednesday nights along the way? And so it was kind of the evolution of that, and some of those rights were sold off along the way, and it kind of opened the door. I certainly am thankful for it. It has given me the ability to have a job that doesn't feel like a job.
No, there's no question about that. Hey, we'll continue to talk about some of the legacy of Paul Gallo with Richard Cross when we come back after this, and we'll just share some poignant thoughts about where we go from here and how Paul will inspire us as we go forward. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. We're honoring our dear friend Paul Gallo, who passed away this past weekend. And man, what an impact he has made on Mississippi. And we're visiting with my friend Richard Cross, who has been sitting in that seat for over 4 months. And I don't think anyone understands, at least that sit in that seat, that understands the intimate relationship Paul had with his listeners than you. To be able to sit there for that length of time and really get that, it's something special, isn't it?
It is, and it's evident through the text messages that we've gotten. We use the text line as kind of our primary connection point with the audience in terms of feedback and allowing the audience to weigh in on topics and sometimes getting news. Earlier this week when it was snowing in your neck of the woods, we had folks in Gulfport and in other parts of coastal Mississippi sending us pictures and images, and it's like, hey, that's the way to connect. We don't get a lot of this. We want to show you the snow that's in coastal Mississippi, and we were like right there on the other side of it. I remember as a kid how excited you were when snow came. I was like, hey, send us your pictures. We want to see what it looks like when it's snowing on the beach. And so, yeah, it's a great way to connect. But yes, that relationship was evident. And for the last few months, going back to the end of September into October and then through into the new year, there was not a day that went by, not a single day that went by where there wasn't at least one message, and usually a handful of them. Hey, any update on Paul? We're concerned about him. Some of them were kind of demanding even. Hey, you hold on a second now. Listen, we're going to honor the family's privacy. We're going to handle this the way that they want it to be handled. But even in those messages, it was clear that there was a concern for somebody that they cared about. hey, how's Paul doing? Please pass along our prayers. Please let his family know that we're thinking about him. Can't wait for him to be back on the year. Some backhanded compliments. Hey, you're doing a great job, Richard, but apologies. Can't wait for Paul to be back. I get it. I get it. And so I think that was really special to see. And I tried to share with his daughter a couple of times along the way, like, hey, I don't want to bother you, but I do want you to know that the people are asking and people care, and we're encouraging them to continue to be prayerful for your family through a trying time. And I think that continues even now, even after Paul's passed away. Those messages are continuing to come in, and I think Patsy and Jennifer and Mark and their extended family appreciate knowing that people cared so much.
Hey, one more segment from my show with Paul Gallo, and then we'll talk on the other side. Here we go.
But he buys the hamburger. So, good deal.
Hey, Paul, you know what? As a listener, here's what I would say. I believe, so obviously, you have a conservative voice. You have your strong opinion about things. When you talk to people who share your point of view, that's what it is. However, when you have other people on who have a different point of view, I don't find you to be unfair at all to them. And I don't find you to be restrictive in their ability to share with you their point of view. Yeah. I admire that in you. And I think that people who would say what you just said of you, they haven't listened to the sort of total body of work that Paul Gallo is involved in, because you are interested in hearing the other side of the equation, aren't you?
I am, if it doesn't get stupid. I mean, because that's if it gets stupid, that's a slap in the face to me and this audience. And I treasure this audience as a whole. I really do. And I always talk about their family, but they are my audience family out there, and they've been with me for a long time. When you've been doing the show for 54 years, almost 55 as of February, then if you start doing it that long, you've come through a lot of people. You've had great listeners who've listened to you that passed on, that you remember. In the middle of the night, you think about a voice that you had on back, certainly when we were doing a lot of calls. And that's another evolution of radio, from taking the calls to doing what we're doing now. And I think in this social media day, you couldn't do that anymore as far as taking calls. And I do miss that. Yeah. But it's one of those things that it wouldn't work today.
Richard, don't you love his honesty? I was recalling your conversation earlier this week with J.T. Mitchell, the news director for SuperTalk, where he talked about Robert Johnson and who's a Democrat representative in Mississippi, debating with Paul, but at the end always making sure that looking over at Paul and saying, "Don't forget I like you, Paul." But isn't it interesting that he did welcome other voices, didn't he?
He absolutely did, and built real, meaningful, and lasting friendships with people who saw the world through a different prism than the one through which he viewed it. I think about the relationship that he had with Steve Holland. They did not see eye to eye on many things, and yet it was a lasting relationship. It was a lasting friendship, and there was a great deal of mutual respect there. George Flaggs and others through the years who were regular guests on his program, that had very different viewpoints, but they found common ground along the way and built lasting relationships.
It is so interesting to hear him say, "As long as it doesn't get stupid." That's classic Paul.
Very on brand.
He's protecting the ears of his listeners. I just love the way he said that. Listen, God bless you, my friend. I know it's been tough for you and all of those fellow employees have had to work day in and day out with Paul. And I know but he's in a better place.
It has been an honor for me to be able to sit in that chair and behind that microphone that Paul had occupied for so many years.
Yeah. God bless Paul Gallo's family, and we will keep his legacy alive for many years to come. God bless everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.